Catering to your family's medical needs or carrying apparel, gifts, and beauty products, Savannah Pharmacy provides you with more than just prescriptions. Remember, they're always just around the corner with everything your family needs and convenient opening hours, including Sundays and holidays. Savannah Pharmacy. For more information, call 946-3336.
Subway is serving up a special new sauce, bursting with flavor in every bite. The new Savory Collection is a tropical sweet and spicy sauce made with a combination of spices, habanero peppers, thyme, onion, black pepper, ginger, citrus juices, and molasses.
So good.
Wow.
Sensational.
Delicious.
Subway's Savory Collection pairs perfectly with our oven roasted chicken or steak sub. Savor the flavor. For a limited time, only at Subway. Subway. Eat fresh.
Make your house into a home. Welcome to Brand Source Home Gallery, your source for premium products and a premium experience. We'll design and install your dream kitchen with crafted cabinets, complemented with elegant appliances. We'll fill it with quality houseware and cookware. Custom-designed closet and storage solutions organize and beautify any area. And with the finest bedding, you'll get a perfect night's sleep knowing Brand Source Home Gallery has everything you need to make your house a home.
The Spring Labor Force Survey is currently being conducted by the Economics and Statistics Office. The Labor Force Survey collects data on employed and unemployed persons. Trained interviewers with ESO ID cards will visit randomly selected households in all districts. The interviewers will exercise appropriate COVID-19 protocols using personal protective equipment. The interviews are confidential in accordance with the statistics law. No individual data will be published or disclosed. Survey data are exempt from freedom of information. For more details, please call the ESO on 516-3329.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners' participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome back, and thank you very much for joining us. And again, thanks very much to the Governor for spending the last hour with us and sharing some perspectives. It is an open line for the remainder of the program. If you want to share a thought with us, maybe add some commentary to what was shared earlier, or even, inquire about something else. As I was just looking at a quick comment here from one of our listeners who's sharing that they're having slight issues with the phone lines. We do apologize for that. And if you want, give us a shout. Try to share. See if you can get through 949-8037. And toll free 1-800-534-8255. Share your thoughts with us. Again, to at least 1, 2, 3 individuals who the messages say that they were trying to get through but couldn't. We don't quite sure exactly why. We do recognize at times there are issues relative to the phone lines. So give us a shout and see if you can be a part of our discussion. 949-8037, or toll free at 1-800-534-8255. Or you can WhatsApp me, 925-3261. And if you want to share your thought that way, or just to confirm whether you're able to access it. And as His Excellency reminded us, we're celebrating the Platinum Jubilee, and to see the activities across the Commonwealth, but in particular in our own country, what we'll be doing. It's a good time to respect and recognize that we come together as a community. The importance of a healthy democracy requires the participation, the active, engaged, informed participation of its people. And of all of the very important points His Excellency made, I would not want to say this is the most important, but I think it's one that we can perhaps more easily address. That's our road safety. Please, as he perhaps shared, let's be a little more conscientious and considerate and respectful when we're moving out and about on the roads. We go to the phones. Welcome, good afternoon. Thanks for calling.
Hi, how you doing?
Not bad, not bad. How are you?
If life was any better, I'd be in heaven.
You know what, man? Thank God for mercies, grace, and provision and protection, huh?
Yeah. One of the things that when I was listening to the governor talk, he made mention of Cayman not being able to go much farther. Otherwise, we'd be removing the UK out of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was thinking about the way that the current arrangement is structured, everything is tilted in the favor of the UK, so that constitutionally, the UK they have their role in this process is conflicted, as I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and Jesus told us that no man can serve two masters, because you'll be loyal to one and not the other.
Mm-hmm.
And in Section 31, subsection 3 of the Constitution Order, it says that when the governor is carrying out his responsibilities as governor, he shall endeavor to look out for the interests of the Cayman Islands, so long as those interests are consistent with the interests of the United Kingdom.
Okay.
In other words, they will try to look out for our interests, but if their interest gets in the way, then too bad for our interests.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's not a modern relationship. That's a very corrosive and destructive relationship, and very damaging to us as a people to live in such a colonial structure. Perhaps one of the things that should be done is so for example, a lot of decisions are made by Mr. Frans Manderson, right? Because a lot of the stuff is delegated to him. But the truth of the matter is that the deputy can't have his own way separate from the governor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Mr. Manderson is really working for the British and fulfilling their interests first, right? I know people think of Mr. Manderson as a Caymanian who has Cayman at heart, but he's in a position where constitutionally he's required to look out for the interests of the UK before he looks out for our interests. By nature of the fact that he is the deputy governor.
Mm-hmm.
I think that needs to change yesterday. And the reason is that what it does is it puts the UK in a position where they can just unilaterally decide which interests will be served. What should be done, perhaps instead, is to create a different position constitutionally in which the person is constitutionally charged to look out for the interests of the Cayman Islands. And the governor is responsible for looking out for the interests of the United Kingdom. And then dialogue around those interests, competing interests, can be had and ways can be worked out in which a better balance can be made regarding the satisfying of Cayman's interests.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of having it where it's in one person, because that is a conflict of interest like you can't even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And if the governor says that we're promoting good governance, and if conflicts of interest are corrosive in other environments, why would it not be corrosive in this particular instance?
What do you think we could do in that sort of redefined relationship to ensure that our interests aren't superseded by?
Well, you first have to have somebody constitutionally charged to look out for your interests. Right now, that's not the case. Right now, what Section 31.3 says is that they will only look out for our interests as long as it doesn't conflict with their interests.
Right. But what about our elected members, as we call them, MPs now? I mean, they're in the House.
They still have to comply with 31.3, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, you have to realize, right, that what people think of as Cayman's constitution is not really Cayman's constitution.
Mm-hmm.
This is the UK's constitution for the Cayman Islands, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the governor is responsible for governing the country, but because there's so much work to be done, he can't do it all himself. So powers have to be delegated to others to fulfill certain responsibilities in a
Mm-hmm.
timely manner.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what that effectively means is that if the constitutional requirement is that the interest of whose interest will be served is that of the UK first,
Mm-hmm.
and only if it doesn't conflict with the UK interest can we have our way. The politicians still have to comply with that too. What you need is a constitutional provision that says, no, your interest is to look out for the interests of the Cayman Islands. And so when you sit at the table and you speak, you're speaking from the perspective of what would be best for Cayman. And when the governor speaks, he's speaking at what would be best for the UK. And then they would have to sit down and work out how those differences are resolved. Right now, that level of consideration doesn't take place. They just unilaterally say, we'll do it our way.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a modern relationship. That's not in our best interest.
Yeah. Would you liken that then, and I don't want to, I don't want to move away from the topic in the conversation, but would you liken that in the political context of what may happen in the contractual arrangement with employer and employee, where the employers will say, well, listen, if you want this job, this is how it has to be. This is your hours. You need to consent to no overtime pay or work on holidays, or you need to show proof of this in order to get that. I mean, would it be something similar?
No.
Okay.
If you read Article 73B of the UN Charter, which deals with the decolonization process,
mm-hmm.
it's about the interests of the people of the territory. It's about our aspirations, our desires, how we wish to develop. The UK has been skillful enough to cause us to accept provisions that basically say the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm saying is that we need those provisions removed from the Constitution, and that the UK need to accept that as long as we are engaging in fulfilling our aspirations in a lawful and proper way, that it should be allowed. And that no, it's not just about the interests of the United Kingdom. It's about our interests, because if we continue to follow this route, our people are going to continue to be disadvantaged. You know what the birth rate in the Cayman Islands is? Last time I looked at it was, I think, like 1.5. We're not even keeping the current level of the Cayman population. We're disappearing. Okay?
I don't think
and part of that is affordability. You have to be able to afford to have a family of sufficient size
mm-hmm.
to be able to grow the population.
And that's becoming increasingly difficult when we factor in the cost of housing and the like. How many of us do you think are cognizant of that statistic, but also, and perhaps more importantly, the consequence of it?
I'm sure a significant number of people do understand it, but I think what happens in life oftentimes is that the urgent things crowd out the important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's not like, okay, it's not going to be the end of the world tomorrow on that issue of birth rate. So the paying the bills that have to be done by next week gets most of the attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess this is where that discussion has probably not been had sufficiently, and maybe the attempt to grow the population through immigration and the like may necessarily, create the outcome that we're hoping for.
Well, what you're actually doing is you're importing cultures that are different, which in and of itself is not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're importing cultures that see nothing wrong with doing things in a corrupt way or engage in crime, then all that's going to do is make things worse. You got to make sure that who you're allowing to become a permanent part of your population is actually beneficial for your population.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just as simple as saying, "Oh, diversity, you got to be inclusive." It's not that simple.
Is it then? I mean, we've heard it said often, and perhaps people have different objectives. But think of companies, for instance. They come in and they introduce you to the organization. They have a training, an acclimation, and a period of bringing you on board so you can appreciate their ethos and their corporate culture. Is it then necessary for the country to first understand what is it that it wants, how to achieve it, so that level of information, education, and awareness for all of us, that this is what's important, this is who we are, this is the hymnal from which we sing. Is that now more important than ever?
It has always been important, but the only way to deal with that is to legislate.
Okay.
Because if you want to achieve a certain outcome and you want to discourage something, then you have to legislate against that which you wish to discourage.
But we have legislation now, and some would say, well, it's not being enforced, or it's being so brazenly broken, that it's almost, it doesn't make sense.
But one of the problems I find with the way that legislation is worded is it'll make someone responsible for ensuring that something gets done, but there's no penalty if you don't get done. You just continue to get a raise, you continue to get your pension, you just continue to live as if you were doing such a great job, even when you're not.
Well, that could prove a challenge, but what if the legislation is such that it gives a fair bit of discretion to people, or even the practice is selective enforcement?
No, we need to move away from discretion. That's the problem. That's where corruption comes in. I'll tell you, I remember looking at the subject of black laws in the U.S. many years ago, and every time I heard people talk about how the black laws were so unfair and they made a reference to one, I would go and read the law and I would scratch my head and I would say, well, I don't see what the problem is. And one day I was just searching for some stuff online and I came across a Florida Supreme Court ruling in which a judge was explaining how black laws work. And I was absolutely horrified to realize that I was totally blind to how black laws actually work. And it's incredibly simple. And the corrosiveness of black laws is discretion. Because the way the black laws actually are detrimental is that you give someone this wide discretion that they can do whatever they feel is best, and then they decide to use it against blacks but not use it against whites. And so, no, discretion is not the answer. You need accountability in the process. You need a defined. You need a process that when somebody go and try to understand what should the process be, they can understand what happens if they do X, Y, and Z, and what happens if they don't. and that it's clear, because you see, it has to be fair to the person who is trying to accomplish this thing, right? It can't be that, well, I don't know what he's going to think. Well, it's kind of up to him. If he wakes up on the wrong side of the bed and says, no, well, oh, too bad for me. No, that's not good governance. That's tyranny.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I don't know if the caller can hear me, but okay. You there, sir?
I can hear you.
Okay, yeah.
I can hear you.
For a second there, I thought that I had, stepped into the wilderness. All right, but yeah, you could hear me. That's good. But then discretion. I mean, we're increasingly doing it. And I like the fact that you shared that, because the other day, the good folks over at the Department of Labor and Pensions, and they were talking about, the whole issue of practice, and the senior officer referenced that, it isn't a fine up to, it's a fine of, which is different. So back to how what you said, how legislation is that's an old practice that we haven't quite understood the consequence, or is it that we're mindful of it from the perspective of drafting legislation, from crafting legislation, that we want it that way, so that it's very subtle, but it's effective, because defendant A comes before the courts and the fine is up to 10,000, so you could give $1. Defendant B comes before the courts, and for whatever reason the court say, you know what, I wish I could give you 100,000, but the maximum is 10,000, so here's the fine for the same offense.
Yeah, well, I think that it's appropriate for those types of penalties to be legislated for, but this is where policymakers need to carefully consider how they lay out something, like the logic that they're applying to the writing this legislation that says this minimum will be this and the maximum will be that. It needs to be well thought out, which is fine. What you don't want it to just be unlimited, because then that discretion could be used to literally wipe someone out completely, where they could never, ever possibly recover from it.
I mean, as you shared, I think just my limited engagement with the U.S. judicial system relative to the 3 strikes rule that they had, and some of the proponents said, oh, this would be a great deterrent, and now some were sharing, well, you had an offender who may have committed a particular act at one point and then a second act, but here's this third offense that is relatively minor. He could see the gradual rehabilitation of the individual, but this infraction now activates the 2 former offenses, and for this small infraction, this person now has perhaps a life sentence or an extended sentence. Yeah. So
I'm not suggesting that we have the balance perfect on everything. I'm just saying that the logic of having a minimum and a maximum is fine, as long as it's well thought out.
What is the phrase in UK legislation where police officers, I know it was battled about here, it's not warrants, the police officer can issue you cautions, I think is the word that they use, and I think we now employ that with certain offences, so you can get a caution. It's not recorded, but then it's again back. Is that back to what you were sharing, the idea of discretion?
Well, it is back to that, but what I'm saying is that as long as the exercise of that discretion has a good logic and it's well laid out, I'm not saying it can't work, but you don't want to just say, oh, you have this discretion, go and do whatever you feel like doing. That would be a bad idea. But I can imagine that there are circumstances in which a young person might have done something wrong, and perhaps they're taking a couple steps down the wrong road, but maybe it's possible that, if they got a break, they might be appreciative of that and change their ways.
Right.
Rather than being too draconian in certain circumstances. Now, I'm not saying that in relation to very serious crime.
No,
right?
not at all.
But I'm just saying that we need to about whether we have those things properly laid out and properly. This is the role of legislators. Now, one of the things that the governor made reference to is the separation of powers. Was something that's not talked about very much when they talk about separation of powers is the opposite of what they do say, which is normally thinking of politicians interfering with civil servants. But the reverse is also true, right? For example, a chief officer could give advice, or is the role of a chief officer, part of that role is to give advice to ministers of government. But advice is not an order, right? So in the same way that a politician can't go to a civil servant and demand that they do certain things in an informal way, and that's not the role of the MP. In that same way, the civil servant can't demand that a politician take their advice, and politicians should be aware that it's just advice, right? Because let's say that you get advice from a chief officer of how to do a particular thing. The role that the MP will play when considering the advice from the chief officer is much wider. It includes political elements that the chief officer wouldn't be getting into. They would be dealing with the technical aspects and the legality of something, right? But not the political. So I'll give you an example. It might be considered a bad example by some, but it drives home the point that I'm trying to make, which is, let's say, alcohol, right? Some people look at alcohol and they think, well, as long as you don't abuse it, it's okay. Some people think if you drink 1 ounce of alcohol, you're the devil. And so this is a moral issue, right? It has very significant consequences if somebody abuses alcohol. And so harms can come out of alcohol. But a legislator still has to look at the policy decisions that have been made by the country and say, do we want to continue this? Do we want to change it? And if so, how? And if you don't make decisions based upon what is only what you think is the best way to do something, because there's more than one way of doing certain things, and the policymakers have made the decision to say, well, we'll make alcohol available for sale, even though we know that somebody is going to abuse it, drive in their car and wrap themselves around a light pole and kill themselves, right? And so some will say, but this is horrible. You need to change that, right? But how far down the road would you like politicians to go in taking away your right to decide what happens with you versus them putting in play versus you having that right?
Yeah, but and as you speak to the whole issue, the BVI, the Commission of Inquiry, this report talked about the political interference in the appointments in the civil service, right? But picking up on the point that you referenced, we see allegations in the private sector, for instance, of cronyism. Certain people getting promotions, appointments, or certain benefits, travel, otherwise, even training, because of the favors that they're able to curry with those in the organization or in the industry. What about then, to your point, with the chief officer giving the advice to the politician, or the politician trying to influence the civil service? Could allegedly the same thing happen within the civil service? That it's not the politician that are making the appointments or interfering, but they appointed people navigating the path, for those whom they prefer to elevate.
Well, this is where, so who sits in a position, right? What you want to do is this: you want to define legislation and draft it in such a way that who is in that position is not the most important thing. What you want to do is to design the rules around how things will be done, so that regardless of, the person might want to do something, but it requires such openness that if they try to do it, then it would be obvious what they're doing. In other words, you counter that corruption by shining sunlight on it, right? So in other words, instead of having so much secrecy, you have more transparency. But not so much transparency that you see right through it, as in translucent, right? Because you can things can be designed in a way that even though it's claimed to be done in open public, you still don't see sufficient amounts of information to actually truly understand what's happening.
You see what's shown to you, but you don't see how it's derived. Yeah,
that's right. And so the fact that a politician is picking someone to be in that position, that in and of itself is not necessarily bad. What is bad is not having proper rules to say how that person shall or shall not behave in that position, and follow it up with penalties.
Right.
Because, as I said before, part of the biggest problem that we have with people being required to do something is that when they don't do it, and you say, well, where's the penalty section? You realize there is no penalty section.
Right. This is why I always appreciate engaging with you, in particular publicly, because you share your perspective from a very considered and informed one, and gives us a chance to not just question, but to go back now and confirm. So hey, thank you very much, man. Any closing thoughts, or thought? We'll talk to you again, right?
Yeah. Take care.
All the best, man. Thank you. And the caller reminds us of the importance, as I probably said earlier and say often, for a populace, we need to be engaged and informed. If you'll forgive it as a political statement, it's not intended. If you're eligible to be registered as a voter, get registered as a voter on election day. You can go out, whether it's a referendum, whether it's a general election or otherwise, to exercise your democratic right to vote for, as you choose. And that is very, very important, especially now when we're seeing threat to freedoms, the challenge to democracies. I was very grateful that His Excellency, like many of the elected and appointed members of our government, to come in publicly and share their thought. But as the caller shared, let's ensure that we're engaged and informed and very constructive and respectful, responsible and resourceful. Ensure that information is timely, is accurate. It may be trusted, but it's verified. Now, what you do, have a very, very excellent, wonderful, safe, enjoyable, productive week. Let us know how we can be a part of it. Thank you for the opportunity. I know, like many, it's like rain. You feel the dark clouds and you may feel somber, but perhaps instead of looking at it as being cold and cloudy and lightning, maybe you see the rain as renewed, refreshing, rejuvenating to re-energize you. And as you go out and let the drops fall upon your skin, it'll remind you that you are alive. Sometimes you not embrace what is before you, and that is to your folly. But life must go on. Until tomorrow, my friends, be blessed.
Talk Today is brought to you by Subway, open 24 hours in Countryside, Anderson Square in Georgetown, and Centennial Towers in West Bay. And by the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport. Explore your history, explore your land, explore your sister islands. MedLab in Smith Road Plaza, your complete medical laboratory solution. Call 949-7331. And Savannah Pharmacy in Countryside Shopping Village, convenient opening hours including Sunday